I started serving when I commissioned in 1990 into the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, and I'm still serving today, some 32 years later, in what is now the Royal Regiment of Scotland.
I'm married to Hugo. We've been married for nearly 27 years, and I grew up as an Argyll daughter. When I was born in 1972, I've been with the regiment ever since, really.
I think Sharon knows enough about the army to be relatively pragmatic about the reality of operations, and was very good at perhaps protecting the children from some of that. I think it became most profound when I deployed on my first Afghan tour with the operational mentoring and liaison team. And I know that my daughter in particular had a fairly lively imagination, and I know that she was very unsettled by that particular tour throughout. All we could do is just try and keep in touch, to be realistic about things, and just to, there were occasions out in Afghanistan where I had to sort of remind myself that I also had responsibilities back home.
I swore I would never marry anybody in the army. I was never having children. I was going nowhere near the army, not for me at all. And I bumped into Hugo, and I didn't try and fight it because, you fall in love and that's the person. But yeah, it's kind of vaguely amusing now to think, okay, Sharon, you were really good at doing what you said you were going to not do. My mum was a great support because she, if ever I would worry, she would say, no amount of worrying that you're doing is going to make any difference. It's that they're doing a job and that's what you signed up for. And quite often when Hugo's been away, he would come back and he'd say, you've rearranged this and it's like, you don't need me. And I'd say, well, do you want me to sit in a corner crying, or do you want me to scoop up our children and manage? And that was the choice I made. I was a swimmer, not a thinker, with coping with things. When Hugo went off on his first Afghan tour, I wasn't happy. I was just starting out my career as a teacher. I had one child in a local school in Paisley who was then diagnosed with having Asperger's syndrome, and a daughter at boarding school in Northumberland. And as far as I was concerned, Hugo going away and leaving us at that point, I think it's the only time where I've actually said, I don't want this to happen. It was the time when some Afghans inside the barracks turned on some soldiers. And that, for me, was a little bit too real. I'd say that was the toughest. And I remember the odd call I'd have with Hugo. All I wanted to know was, have you got your weapon on you all the time? Are you sleeping with it? It was like silly questions, but that's all I could focus on. As an army wife, you have to think quite carefully about any career that you're trying to manage. It is a juggling act. I found the first year was very full on. And after that, I worked part-time. I couldn't manage to work full-time and manage the children with Hugo being away. It wasn't possible. So I always knew when I married somebody in the army, I made that decision that whatever I needed to do was going to take not a second place, but a second place to my family. So for James and Jess, they've had, I would say, different experiences of being hiked around. I have tried to make it an adventure for them because that's how I was brought up. It was an adventure. Jess, I think, has enjoyed it a lot. James is different. James has Asperger's and he doesn't like the whole anything changing. So they've been hard times, but there've been some real privileges, and I think that they both recognise they both recognise the hard and the privileges. And I'll tell you what I really wanted though, the PRI once made T-shirts that said, "My daddy's an Argyll." And both of them wore those with great pride. And I was really cross that there wasn't one for me.